On behalf of Welcoming America, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar titled Establishing and Maintaining Inclusive Emergency Management with Immigrant and Refugee Populations. Welcoming America leads a movement of inclusive communities becoming more prosperous by making everyone feel like they belong. With over 200 members, the Welcoming Network includes local governments, nonprofits, and individuals committed to making communities more inclusive for all, including immigrants. Through a variety of initiatives, Welcoming America provides members with support in the form of tools, resources, and an international network of peers. We believe all people, including immigrants, are valued contributors and vital to the success of our communities and our shared future. If you need any technical help during today's presentation, please reach out to us via the chat feature. And if you have other content questions, enter them in the chat area, and we will go over as many possible during Q&A at the end. The full presentation is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording as well as a document that will provide the resources that our speakers will share with you today within 48 hours. I now have the great honor of introducing you to some of the amazing speakers who have taken time from their incredibly busy schedules to join us today. My name is George Zavala, and I'm the Western Regional Manager at Welcoming America. It's a pleasure to moderate today's discussion. A little bit of context as to how this webinar came to be. From May to December 2020, Welcoming America hosted an inclusive emergency management community of practice in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Participants included Welcoming Network members and local emergency management practitioners. Feedback from the community of practice participants indicated a need for a tool that community-based organizations, city and county governments, and emergency management practitioners could use to institutionalize inclusive policies and practices beyond the pandemic. The result is our Establishing and Maintaining Inclusive Emergency Management with Immigrant and Refugee Populations checklist. We created this tool with the Institute for Diversity and Inclusion in Emergency Management, also known as I-DIEM. One of our guest speakers today is Chauncia Willis, co-founder and CEO of I-DIEM. Chauncia is certified as an emergency manager, professional coach, and cultural diversity professional with over 20 years of experience. Her expertise includes disaster management, national security event planning, leadership coaching, immigrant and refugee outreach, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion training. Prior to co-founding I-DIEM, Chauncia served as the emergency manager in Tampa, Florida, where she developed successful programs benefiting marginalized populations. She has led national emergency planning efforts for political conventions, National Football League games, and international award shows. In her role as CEO for I-DIEM, she leads the effort to integrate equity into all facets of disaster policy, programs, and practice with the goal of increasing cultural competence and mitigating the harmful impacts of bias on underserved groups. She is the author of Stretching the Race Toward Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in America. Welcome, Chauncia.
Thank you. Thank you, George. I am so delighted to be here. This is going to be an awesome day. It's going to be a fantastic discussion. And as we go throughout the day of discussing this topic, I would just encourage everyone to drop your questions in the chat, and myself and the other panelists will do our best to get to them. So once again, let me say thank you for the opportunity to be here. Our organization was fortunate to partner with Welcoming America to produce this fantastic document that we know will be beneficial for entire communities, as well as specifically emergency management practitioners and those who are operating community-based organizations. So there's one question that we need to ask ourselves, and that is, why do the same people bear the burden of disaster over and over again? And what can we do about that? So this tool is really intended to address those things that will help emergency managers strengthen preparedness plans. When we think about disaster, when we think about emergency management, many times we have a tendency to focus on recovery, but exceptional emergency management focuses on preparedness. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And what I'd like to do is go over the establishing and maintaining inclusive emergency management with immigrant and refugee populations checklist, and really provide everyone with a good understanding of how to use it as a tool for everyday emergency management, especially if you're working in very diverse communities. Now, the 5 areas that we will cover today are intended to address community development, building trust with immigrant and refugee communities, inclusive communication practices, evaluation and maintenance of inclusion, and building inclusive emergency management programs from within. So at this point, you're probably asking, what is inclusive emergency management? Well, that's a great question to be asking. And I'm always reminded of the need for inclusive emergency management when I think about how emergency managers handle disasters. We handle disasters through relationships. We partner. We coordinate through existing communication corridors. We try not to create anything at the time of disaster. We use what is already existing and we collaborate as best as possible. So when you do not have an active knowledge of who is in your community, and your community doesn't know you, and you haven't created those foundational relationships, you are essentially unable to build an inclusive emergency management program. When we are talking about inclusive emergency management, it is intentional. It is an action that requires intention. It requires using a lens of equity that says, what does my community need? But first, who is my community? And we'll go over that, that understanding of knowing who is in your community, who makes up your community, and whether or not you are being inclusive in your approach. Next slide. Okay, so community assessment. This is critical because a community assessment is going to allow the opportunity to get to know your community. Inclusive emergency management helps you identify the unique needs and assets of different community groups, including immigrants and refugees. And we are doing that in the context of emergency. Community assessments help identify the adverse impacts of race, immigration status, country of origin, language, even income. And believe it or not, location. As we saw with the recent disaster in Texas, if you are living in a community that has been redlined, which is where Black and Brown people were not allowed to purchase housing in more desirable locations. They were prevented from getting loans, and as such, the location is in less desirable areas, possibly more vulnerable to disaster, higher risk. As you see, with that disaster in Texas, the ice storm, the same groups were most impacted. Those who are traditionally excluded and those who are living in locations that have infrastructure that has been underinvested. And what happens is you have a grid system that fails. So we ask that question again, why do the same groups of people continue to bear the burden of disaster? And it's because of our planning. It's because of our lack of inclusion. And we, as people, bring our bias to work every day. And until we address the bias, until we address the blatant disregard for being inclusive in some cases, we will continue to see the same results. We must partner with our communities. And before we can partner, we must know who is there. One of the things that's important to understand is a community assessment can be formal or it can be informal. It may be pulling the demographics for your community so you understand which are the major languages being spoken and then creating a language map. Or it could be conducting a demographic assessment based on income so that you are aware of what the major needs might be in terms of commodities and pre-planning resources for that community. For example, if you know that you have a large group that is considered low income, that is not the community to push purchasing disaster kits. We have to develop programs such as preparedness on a budget to ensure that those groups are prepared and that we're taking a more community-centric focus on communal preparedness. And oftentimes, unfortunately, when we have emergency managers that do not connect with the community and community-based organizations, we can develop a mindset that says, do the most for the most. And when you have that mindset of doing the most for the most, it leaves everyone else who does not have a lot, it leaves everyone else out and you create gaps. So we have to be intentional in focusing on equity and focusing on understanding our community. I can remember in Tampa, when I was the emergency manager there, we had a disaster that impacted Tampa. It was the earthquake in Haiti. And having worked in Tampa, I had already done a community assessment and I knew we had a significant Haitian population. So when we were told to mobilize to the airport to receive injured Haitian victims coming from that disaster, my first thought was, we need to make sure that when the plane arrives, the C-130, when it pulls in, we have Haitian, we have Creole speakers to greet them so that they feel welcome and so that they can ask questions and receive information in their own native tongue. Now, had I not taken the time to meet with our Haitian and Creole groups throughout Tampa, I would not have had anyone to call during that time to say, it's midnight, can you meet me at the airport? That's just one example of inclusive emergency management and why a community assessment is vital. Next slide. Building trust with immigrant and refugee communities. Trust. Trust is significant because relationships are the key to emergency management. If we don't have trust in our communities, many times, unfortunately, when things of a significant nature like a disaster happen, you rely on your known instincts and your known relationships. So if there's a disaster such as a pandemic like we're experiencing right now with COVID-19, and we have not built trust in certain communities and in fact have operated in a realm of knowing distrust, then we cannot expect those communities to assume that what we're saying is valid and to follow our recommendations or direction. Trust is needed for any relationship to be successful, especially in our communities. So in addition to knowing your community, you must then take the step to be actively engaged in building trust. You must be actively engaged in understanding the value of trust within the community as well. So when there's a program happening in a particular community, whether it's a, it could be a neighborhood meeting of sorts, ask to come in and participate. Can I bring some brochures on preparedness? Can I give a demonstration? Can I do anything to participate so that the community becomes familiar with seeing me and my organization? There have been many times as an emergency manager that I have gone out to community meetings at night to present, and not only to present, but to introduce myself to everyone. There's a group here in this city that meets on a quarterly basis, a Turkish group. I make sure I attend the luncheons and say hello to everyone and make sure that the group is familiar with me. So that's just one way, very simple, but so meaningful to build that trust. And when we talk about trust, we see that come up time and time again in times of disaster, where even now with the vaccine distribution, there's a small percentage of African Americans and other people of color who have distrust. And it's not unreasonable to have that distrust for the medical community. And it has historical foundations and roots. And you have to acknowledge that in order to appropriately begin discussing important messages and communicating in a way that can be well received. Next slide. Inclusive communication practices. We just spoke about how important it is to have meaningful communication and dialogue with our communities, all of our communities. To be quite honest, when we as emergency managers and possibly other organizations have taken the time to communicate, we do it in our own method, in our own language, and we wonder why it misses the mark. We wonder why our message didn't do what we thought it should do. Why didn't they mobilize at the location that they should have gone to? And it's because our method of communication is not diverse and inclusive, and it will not reach the intended audience, and it cannot engage them. And it's a two-way street. Communication is a two-way street. So if I am the emergency manager for a community, I know that I have to have a great understanding of the languages spoken within the community, dialects, and I have to have some sort of understanding that when I activate the operations center or when I go out into the community, I need to make sure that I'm identifying communication benchmarks, trails, opportunities to identify ways to communicate. And sometimes it's just word of mouth. You find out some communities, it's better to communicate through community influencers who use word of mouth. But you have to get to know that for your community. So when you're bringing up an emergency operations center, a part of the standard operations procedure must be to translate, have a translator representing those communities or who is familiar with translating in the language and dialect of the communities represented. And if there are multiple communities, then definitely making sure that you're translating in the top 5 or even 6 languages spoken. So that's something that's very important. And most importantly, it's about being intentional. Next slide. Evaluation and maintenance of inclusion. Okay, this one is important because how often do we deploy and we think we've done a great job and we never turn around to say to the community, how did I do? How was our program? Did we help out? Did we do what we were supposed to do? And that feedback will allow your planning efforts to become more refined and enhance the quality and substance of the emergency plans, of the outreach plans. Many times we don't we don't give enough value to targeted outreach and connection with our diverse communities, specifically our immigrant and refugee population. Often because there can be language barriers, we assume that they'll figure it out at some point, what needs to happen. It's a very cavalier and not at all intentional approach. But when we take the time to be transparent and say that we want to include you and we want to make sure that what we're doing is of service and is valuable, and we want you to tell us how to do it in a way that will be impactful, you start to see amazing results. And so that's where we want to be. That is the sweet spot. The sweet spot is using a tool such as this one to really promote inclusion and to, as much as possible, approach our communities in a way that says you have value and we want to have you participate in what we're doing, because when we are doing inclusive emergency management well, that means we are also creating inclusive and resilient communities. So I'll stop there and I'll turn it back to you, George. I hope I didn't take too much time. Thank you.
Not at all, Chauncia. Thank you so much for this great overview. Next, what we're going to do is move into our panel discussion. So we invited our Inclusive Emergency Management Community of Practice leadership team and a participant to speak to the practical application of the checklist and share their experience in the community of practice. So first, I would like to introduce each of the speakers, starting with Anka Badurina. Anka is the Executive Director at Building One Community in Stamford, Connecticut. She has played an integral role in shaping the programmatic agenda and priorities for the organization, including providing research, data analysis, and counsel on critical issues impacting the civic and economic integration of immigrants in a city where nearly 2 in 5 residents are foreign-born. Her work carries a special focus on ensuring programs include an equity lens and invariably incorporate the voices of the low-income immigrant origin population in Stamford, Connecticut. Dr. Badurina has a Ph.D. in culture anthropology, a master's degree in commerce, and an undergraduate degree in modern languages with a major in business. Next, we have Edmundo de Lijo, who is an assistant city attorney with the City of St. Paul. Since June 2019, he has been responsible for developing and managing the Immigrant and Refugee Program for the City of St. Paul, an initiative to ensure that St. Paul is a welcoming city for all. Prior to joining the City Attorney's Office, Edmundo spent over 20 years as a private immigration attorney in St. Paul, representing corporations, nonprofit organizations, religious organizations, and individuals before the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of State, and the Department of Labor. Our next panelist is Julia Trujillo Luengo, who is the Director of Maine's first Economic Opportunity and Immigrant Integration Office. Julia has also worked at the state level with multiple populations, including migratory farm workers, refugees, and many others. Julia is originally from the Canary Islands, Spain, but has lived in Maine for 20+ years. And our final panelist is Karen Philippi, who is the Director of New American Integration with the Office of Global Michigan. She has been working in the field of immigration law and immigrant refugee integration for 29 years. Karen began her career by serving as the Immigration and State Department Specialist for U.S. Senator Don Regal. She then worked in various law firms for 20 years, developing and managing employment-based immigration practices before joining the state of Michigan. She has also presented at numerous conferences and webinars, both locally and nationwide. So thank you so much, everyone. I'm really excited to be able to get into some of the questions and really discuss our experience in the community of practice from May to December of 2020, and also the practical use of the establishing and maintaining tools checklist. So I'll kick us off, starting and related to community assessment. Anka, can you tell us about community assessment you did during COVID? What would you recommend as promising practices during COVID for these assessments?
Thank you, George. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone today. I just wanted to mention that prior to COVID, we had already run an immigrant community needs assessment, that it was large in scope and it included multi-methods approach and so on, that was later replicated by our local philanthropy group. So when COVID hit, in no time we set ourselves to do a very much informal, nothing to what we have done in the past, community assessment. And as Chauncia was saying before, it was just started to call people. It was very informal, but it was right there. So we called our families, we called people that we knew were going to be in the most distressed situation potentially, but we also met on site with our day workers. We, and I have to say, Building One Community is a local nonprofit in Stanford dedicated to serve the immigrant community of greater Stanford area. And one of our critical groups are the day laborers. So we decided to meet with them, and our intention was to understand what their situation was, their reality. It was a time when Connecticut shut down and we could work from home, but our immigrant community could not. So they were losing jobs by the minute, and they were in serious distress about food insecurity and rent. So we wanted to understand those realities, but it was also very important for us as well to understand perceptions. What were the myths around what was happening with, at the global level, what was happening down in, up in China, and what was happening on site in our community. And I say this because sometimes I feel that understanding the community's perception is as important as understanding their realities. Sometimes people, myth and perceptions really guide how they're gonna live. So for example, we understood that for our day workers, their own cultural idea that I am a man and this of not shaking hand is not gonna pan well with me, it was important for us to understand, because later communications will exactly address that, how to really talk to the male community of day workers when it comes to how to protect themselves. So this understanding what was going on again in terms of myth, perceptions, and fears was as important as understanding what was keeping them up at night with the food insecurity and so on. And that very informal, again, assessment allow us to put in place and pivot our programs. Not only we were moving everything online, but it also allowed us to understand that the food supply chain was compromised and we had to step out and do something for our community. So we, from one day to the next, we rallied the community around, the larger community, we raised funds, and in less than a week, we had already a B1C pantry to supply food that was also cultural sensitive to our own community. We also learned that for many of them, cans, which is usually most of the food drive are made out of cans. For the local Latinx community, cans is associated with cancer, so that was not gonna work. So it's really been very intentional in understanding those cultural nuances. So we put our country, but it will also allow this assessment, allow us to understand that it was critical to start strengthening or starting, in some cases, relationships and partnerships with other players in town that will allow to enhance the support that our community needed, support that we potentially could not provide. And just as an example, many of the day laborers and families as well live in very overcrowded conditions. So how could we ensure that there was an isolation place for our community? Because when the CDC was telling everyone, you've got to isolate, isolating when you live with another 10 folks in the same 2 rooms is not possible. So we were not only, this assessment also allow us to have their voices of our community, to be able to bring those voices to the other entities in town that will have different muscles, if you will, to support the community.
Thank you so much, Anka. I think what you said makes so much sense about community assessments being vital to really understanding what the communities that we're serving are facing and what their biggest needs are. And part of what this tool I think helps to address is that simultaneous process of community assessments, as well as building trust with immigrant and refugee communities, and that sometimes it's which one comes first. And so, Karen, I have a question for you. During COVID, what virtual strategies have been essential in establishing trust with immigrant and refugee communities? And how do you perform that?
Sure, thanks, George. It's great to be here with everybody. First of all, I would say this section about building trust with immigrant and refugee communities really weaves through all the other sections of the tool as well. That partnership development piece is really critical, I think, to all the aspects. We did some virtual meetings and a lot of obviously email communications with partners, especially early on in the pandemic, to try and understand some of the needs. But I think what was really the most fortunate for us in hindsight is that since our office was created 7 years ago, partnership development and intentional partnership development statewide has been an enormous focus for us. And also a broad partnership. So we partner, our partners include immigrant and refugee service organizations, universities, legal service providers, local and county government and economic development units, our 3 state ethnic commissions, legislators, ethnic chambers and business organizations, and many others across the state. And because of those relationships we've developed over the years, we thankfully had kind of that built-in trust among our partners and between our partners. And so when we started having documents translated, state-specific COVID-related material translated, we already had the benefit of that network where we could send that information out to our network and then requested, and they did, send it out within their networks. So we had a much broader reach that way. The other really big benefit of these partnerships was due to funding, and I know we're a lot struggle with that, especially during the pandemic. Due to funding issues, we were only able to translate into 6 different languages. And our partners then looked to see where they thought the other needs were. And so they were able to then translate information into additional materials. So we also were really trying to complement each other's work, which again was just a testament to the partnerships that we had developed already. And I would say that, you know, when looking at the tool that's been developed, you know, again, proactively cultivating those relationships with immigrant and community leaders. And I would even say go broader, right? Again, we've got a lot of other quote unquote, non-traditional partners in the immigrant and refugee space that have been great connectors for us into, say, international students, et cetera. Informing and inviting immigrant and refugee community members to events. We hold 3 to 4 stakeholder meetings a year. And we also, you know, attend our partners' meetings. We go to our partners' events, celebrate their successes with them. And then we also communicate with our immigrant and refugee leaders and organizations constantly throughout the year. And I think all of those pieces go to building that trust. And it's something that, like I said, for us, it was something we had thankfully done before the pandemic that really helped us through the pandemic. And I would say our relationships have just grown even stronger during the pandemic itself.
Thank you so much, Karen. Yeah, I think that really does bring up one of the topics or themes that we saw at the beginning of the pandemic. And as we started to meet as a group, that really emerged was language access, and really identifying the best ways to identify what does language access mean for each community that was represented in the community of practice, and thinking about, is that digital literacy? Is that translated materials? What does the policies in place look like? And so as we think about the inclusive communication practices, what are some of the obstacles that you found or that you heard about trying to reach already hard to reach audience who may have limited digital access or digital literacy? What are some of those examples to the whole group?
George, I can jump in. This is Edmundo. And I'm in St. Paul, and you know, we're in a situation in St. Paul where we're kind of a victim of our own success. We've had very successful refugee resettlement programs in Minnesota and in St. Paul. Because of that, in St. Paul, our school system has identified that our residents speak over 129 languages in their homes, at home. And you know, just about 1 in 5 of St. Paul's residents is foreign born. And it makes language access really difficult at times. But I think the way that we were able to kind of address some of those problems was, I think that we have a very strong equity program in St. Paul. In our employees, we try to reflect the people who live in this city. And through that program, we've hired a lot of people, and we were able to identify people within our own city government that spoke many of the languages that people were speaking at home. So we were able to create, and at the time of the pandemic, when we were shutting down, you know, we would have had a lot of people who weren't able to work at the city, because City Hall was shut down. A lot of the facilities were shut down, but we were able to kind of retool those people who had language capacity to kind of come and work on a language line, and so we had a language line that was available 7 days a week, and people could just call in and talk to somebody in their native language, and that was incredibly helpful. You know, so we were able to identify people that worked at the city who spoke languages, and we were able to staff a language line with about 8 or 9 different languages. And then when people called in or we also had an email address where people could write in. If it wasn't a language that that someone on staff spoke, we were able to, within 24 hours usually, find someone who spoke that language and able to help people that way.
Just briefly, George, to add on to what Edmundo said, I mean, for us as a state, our initial challenge, to be very honest, was just even getting the state's attention around language access and language accessible materials for immigrant and refugee communities or English language learners. And so for us, it was really a lot of advocacy within the state, within our executive leadership, to get that started. And then the next big obstacle we faced was, okay, how is this going to be funded? Who's going to pay for it? Which is always another big issue I think we all face, especially when it comes to any type of language, either interpretation or translation services. And so we were able to identify a few different funding sources for us to utilize for the translations that we did. For us specifically, at the state, we did primarily written translations of documents, but then going back to that partnership piece, we partnered with a number of our the organizations that we do work with, and they would, a lot of them do either YouTube videos or short audio clips of some of the information. They might condense some of the information and then transmit that out into the community. So we specifically at the state level did more written, and our partners really picked up a lot on the audio side, which I thought was super helpful.
Thank you so much. Those are both great. I think I reflect back on my naturalization services and the work that I did there, and just really, for as great as technology can be and as wide reaching as it can be, sometimes a phone call or word of mouth really does tend to kind of override the wide reach that technology has in our society. So in thinking about evaluation and maintenance of inclusion, Julia, I'm curious, in the middle of a pandemic, what is a realistic expectation for being more proactive in a community's emergency management inclusion efforts? What would you like today's audience to take away as something they can do to improve how emergency management is handled with immigrant and refugee populations?
Thank you, George, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. I think obviously in the middle of a pandemic and even in non-pandemic times, evaluation is always an afterthought, if it is even an afterthought. So for us, it's really on the forefront of our minds constantly, and just kind of building a bridge between the earlier discussion and this one. something as simple, for example, we've used obviously a lot of social media, a lot of WhatsApp, like most people have paper copies in the food boxes that go to the food insecure, et cetera. But even in social media with our natural helpers program, you know, a big part for us was how many direct channels to the communities can we build and capitalize on. And so we've had the natural helpers program for a couple of years now. But when they decided to film a lot of videos of themselves with key messages in their own languages and share it across their own channels, we obviously empower them because they know the needs in their own communities, how these should go out to the community, why they should look like, et cetera. But also we tracked out of in the back end, I'm not sure if they know this, but I think they do, who has the biggest followers, and using data and social media to orchestrate and strategize to make sure that those messages were going to the most vulnerable communities. And out of all those communities, who are the folks that are really pulling the most bandwidth, if you will. So I think identifying those folks and then having that continuous quality improvement cycle. So with our natural helpers, for example, they were supposed to meet on a monthly basis with us. That was the agreement prior to pandemic time. And then in the middle of the pandemic, they wanted to meet with us every week. So every Friday afternoon, they would spend 2 hours with us. They would tell us what they perceived the needs in their communities were. We would facilitate key presenters and information for them. So they would inform what we did, and they were informed by what we did. So it was a perfect model. We had the chief of police that came in, Department of Labor came in and talked to them directly, especially at the beginning of the pandemic when things were so confusing. I think the other point that I also wanted to make was that Zoom has sort of changed things. And at first, most of the community, including us, we were not very familiar with how to go about these things. And slowly, we've incorporated a lot of the polls feature. And even with communities from different languages and different backgrounds, it's a very powerful tool right away, right then, asking key questions, and then using that data to inform what we do, what we do. And then I think lastly, the race, ethnicity, and language data, as we know, is not a systematic approach yet. You can't find it across the board, but we've been able to showcase that in those areas where we have used race, ethnicity, and language data, for example, to support small businesses and really knowing, okay, this person comes from this background, speaks this language, so therefore we can target this information in this language for that community. We've been able to reach so many more than if we did not have that information. So in our city, for example, now, they are issuing new regulations to allow folks to ask for special permits to have the restaurants open outside in the sidewalks, et cetera. But those things are not being translated. So we can use our data from those areas where we have actually translated things and convince them, advocate, kind of like what Karen was saying, of how important it is to make the special outreach to these communities and translating things to make sure that it reaches the whole population. So I think there's a variation of ways, and I'm mostly interested in post-pandemic time. I don't know how many others have lived through this, but in Portland, there's so much information coming from so many different outlets, so much that I'm interested to learn how much all this noise is being or not effective. So that's an area where we're going to go a little bit more in depth in the evaluation area in the upcoming weeks.
Thank you, Julia. Yeah, it's definitely, so much information is coming from so many different directions and so many promising practices and so many kind of best approaches to kind of handling the pandemic and everything that's come with it. It really makes you think about kind of what will stick beyond the pandemic. And that's kind of what we really wanted to achieve with this tool, was creating a document or a checklist that really kind of was timely for the pandemic and COVID, but also could speak to just kind of building inclusive emergency management beyond the pandemic and taking from what has already been established in the field for many years. And so, Edmundo, as we look toward an eventual wind down of the pandemic, how do you plan on institutionalizing what has been learned during the pandemic about what worked well and what didn't work well with emergency management?
I think what really surprised me that worked well was actually doing, things like Microsoft Team meetings and Zoom meetings. Wow, I think it's so much better to be able to connect in person. One of the things that we learned in connecting through this medium is that in some ways it's almost more intimate for people. We were able to give people direct access to the mayor in smaller groups of 100 to 150 people, where they could actually talk to the mayor and ask a question. And I think that kind of increase in direct access to government officials was something that I did not anticipate. And it's something I'd like to continue. And I think with people's schedules, sometimes it's hard to move people, to a physical location and move around and get everybody, you lose time traveling, so it seems to have been able to make people within the city more accessible to our immigrant and refugee communities. Because I could host a webinar or meeting, and then bring somebody from the city, from the planning department, the head of the planning department, or the chief equity officer, and have them speak directly to our communities. And that has been, that was a surprise. And it's something that I think I'm going to try to continue, even though I really feel a need to get back to meeting with people in person. I think I'm going to try to continue this format and really experiment with doing meetings virtually, where we can bring government leaders to meet with people, because I think that is another way that we've been able to build trust. There's a lot of distrust in certain immigrant communities of my office. When I started, I'm with the city attorney's office. I'm a prosecutor. Or no, I'm not a prosecutor. We have prosecutors in our office. And as the person who's in charge of immigrant and refugee integration in the city, one of the things I was surprised to learn was that people distrusted me because I work for the city attorney's office. They saw me as a prosecutor, and I'm one of the guys that ends up getting people deported. They're not going to talk to me. And that was a real surprise. But, having this format where I could come out and talk to people about what what we're trying to do with regard to immigrant integration and around, emergency planning around COVID, and also around the George Floyd killing. I mean, that was a very tumultuous time for St. Paul, being next door to Minneapolis. We're really like one community. We are two separate, governmental entities, but for all intents and purposes, we are one community. People move back and forth. We're in the same location. We are twin cities. So, just having that, be able to really communicate with people in a much smaller way quickly, I found helped build trust and was very useful. And I want to continue to have that kind of ability in the future.
Thank you so much, Edmundo. I think that I feel like all of you have been able to answer the practical uses of the checklist and kind of really relating your own experiences and really being instrumental in the community of practice and helping guide the conversation and uplifting what we discussed in the community of practice as our motto around leading with uncertainty and not really having the answers, and using the space to really kind of navigate those harder topics, harder questions, harder strategies. And so my final question to the group is, what was your biggest takeaway or the biggest thing that you learned in the community of practice? And whether it's about inclusive emergency management, yourself as a leader, or was it something else?
I can take that one, George. And sorry, I interrupted somebody, but I'll be brief because I just wanted to piggyback on our motto of leading with uncertainty. I think that was critical to me to know that we were creating kind of like a very democratic space in which we could foster and learn about the power of collective knowledge, really, because that what it allowed, that community of practice, that we were all coming from very different angles and very different places in the United States, but we were all sharing the same distress of a pandemic, right? And the humility that came from that community of practices and all the knowledge that generated, I think that was the best and the most powerful thing I could see coming from that community, at least to me.
Just to echo that, Anka, I would agree. I've always felt that peer-to-peer sharing and learning from each other is so impactful and so powerful and so important, because as you mentioned, we all are coming at this from different spaces, different places, but having very similar experience in some of our needs and our issues. And to be able to learn, what's happening in Maine or what's happening in Minnesota and Michigan and how you're handling or approaching something makes us think in other ways. And I think that's hugely impactful. And then the other piece, just briefly, that was incredibly helpful for me was the one-on-one with Chauncia and getting time to talk with her about, kind of future plans around state emergency operations and what we could do to try and impact that, especially, looking at the toolkit on inclusive emergency management. How do we incorporate some of that work into our state emergency operations center?
Well, I think for me, the community of practice, I've only been out at this job about 1.5 years, and I've been on the job a little bit less than 6 months when the community of practice started. And coming from a legal background, where kind of a community of practice approach is the way we do, business. Lawyers talk to each other. We talk about the law. We talk about how to handle situations. But, and I've been an immigration attorney for more than 20 years. Coming in to this immigrant inclusion practice is a very different thing. And I kind of felt like there was no place to talk to people about what I was embarking on doing. But I'm also, an office of one, so it's just me doing this work for the city. Although it is an attitude and a philosophy which is embedded throughout the city, because we have so many people who are looking out for immigrants and refugees who are from the community working in the city. So it's something we all do, but as far as being an office, it's just me. And I having to think about it. The community of practice was so outstanding for me, because I was able to find a group of people, like-minded people who were working in the same field I was working in, and could talk about things that were going on. I could look, and it was great because there were folks from a wide range of experience in the area of immigrant inclusion. So, even when people like me who are starting out, or things I'd already done, people were talking about it, I could go back and think about how I had done it and what mistakes I may have made, what I did right, what I did wrong, and go back and kind of rework things. I also learned a lot from people who were, had been doing it for a while and brought some really unique experiences. So for me, I hope that I was able to help people learn a few things. But for me, I really feel like I learned a ton more from just talking to people and being there and understanding. And even like, it was even therapeutic. It commiserate about what was going on in a place that was kind of safe to talk about it. And you could talk and feel vulnerable and expose yourself and talk about the mistakes you made, talk about what you wish you had done differently, and get feedback and really helped me to grow in my job. So as with the city of St. Paul. So I'm very appreciative of the community of practice. And I would encourage for next practice, if there's anyone out there who's thinking about doing it, they should. I would really encourage it.
I guess I'll just quickly say that I support everything that everybody has said, and I think what is a unique aspect of a community of practice is that we're not here to just share best practices, but we're also here to share what has been challenging, what's still not working. So just that safety of the space and the trust of each other is very unique and very important, and empowering for the work that we have to do at the local and regional level.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. It was really great to have you all participate, to have you lead. Again, you all were instrumental in really making the community of practice what it was, and creating and fostering that environment where everyone could share and come in with these questions, and like we said, lead with uncertainty. So just a few more slides as we get to the end of our presentation. What we have done in the interest of time is recorded all of the questions that were asked in the chat and in the Q&A function. And what we will do is set the questions up on a resource page and share that out with the recording of this webinar. So again, as a reminder, today's presentation has been recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording, as well as a document that shares all the resources that were shared. I also want to make you aware of one additional resource that's coming up. So Welcoming America is launching our Inclusive and Collaborative Committees Community of Practice in early May of this year. As part of the Belonging Begins With Us campaign, Welcoming America is launching this community of practice, which focuses on fostering inclusion and belonging within formal and less formal committees, boards, advisory councils, and commissions. So applications are still being accepted until April 2nd. So please direct any questions that you might have to jordan@welcomingamerica.org. The next slide is on behalf of our audience. I want to thank Chauncia, Anka, Edmundo, Karen, and Julia for contributing to today's discussion. If you'd like to learn more about membership to the Welcoming Network, we invite you to go to welcomingamerica.org/programs/welcoming network, where you will see information about our membership levels and benefits. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us at membership@welcomingamerica.org. And then finally, follow us. If you don't already do so, we invite you to follow Welcoming America through our social media channels, and you can sign up for our monthly newsletter at the bottom of our homepage at welcomingamerica.org, where you can also learn more about membership and make a donation toward all of the great work being done across the country. On behalf of our speakers and everyone at Welcoming America, I would like to thank you, the audience, for your time today, and we hope to see you on a future Welcoming America webinar. Have a great rest of your day.